So the big news
We've been
today.
talking about him, and he was on the trade block. He hasn't quite really had any substantial time in Columbus. They've had him in the AHL. They've scratched him. It's been weird.
It has been weird.
For a couple of regimes now in Columbus. And now he has officially been traded. Minnesota Wild.
He is a Wild.
He is a Wild. Minnesota picks him up. They also get a 5th-round pick. Columbus receives Daemon Hunt. He's a
22-year-old defenseman.
Yeah, he's a little smaller than Helge Grans. They're kind of comparable. He's been more productive in the AHL, but I think they're similar players just based on an elite prospects comparison. They give up a 2025 first, a 2027 second, and a 4th-rounder at some point. It really feels like if this was the asking price across the board, Danny Briere easily matches this.
So here's my understanding of where the Flyers were in this. My understanding is, to be clear, the Flyers did check in. I wouldn't say that they were leading the charge, but they checked in. They had interest in Jiricek. Jiricek obviously was a 6th overall pick in 2022, the year they took Cutter Gauthier. I think they like David Jiricek. I think they see a guy who has some upside, whether it's number 1 defenseman upside, I don't know. But he's certainly a guy worth checking in on because he has upside. My understanding is that, and there may be a lot of reasons for this, but my understanding is that the guys that Columbus wasn't even necessarily the guys that Columbus would have accepted a deal for, but it was the guys that Columbus wanted Briere to offer up just to be in the race are guys that I don't think the Flyers want to trade. And I think that at its core is what happened here. Now, is it possible that those guys, maybe the Flyers are overrating? Maybe. I truly do not know the specific players. But I do believe that when the Flyers checked in, they found out pretty quickly that the guys that Columbus was interested in are guys that they consider to be functionally untouchable, at least for a guy like Jiricek, who maybe they don't think is going to be this slam dunk superstar. Obviously, if you're trading for Connor McDavid, you're willing to give up anybody. Yeah. Jiricek is not a guy that maybe they view high enough to give up the types of players that Columbus wanted. Now, could part of that be that it was an in-division trade? Maybe. You theorized that off air, that possibly Daemon Hunt isn't an A prospect.
He's not a premier prospect.
He's not a premier prospect by any means. Maybe if the Flyers were in the Western Conference in Vegas's division, maybe the asking price would have been less because maybe they didn't want to trade Jiricek to a division rival unless a division rival was willing to pay through the nose essentially for him, and the Flyers, I guess, were not. That's possible. Maybe also it's possible that Columbus just doesn't like the guys who the Flyers are willing to move, and the only guys they really like are the guys who the Flyers consider to be integral parts that they are not willing to give up. But I do believe the Flyers were involved. I just believe that the Flyers found out pretty quickly that Columbus's view of the guys they were willing to move was not particularly high.
I can see there being maybe an extra in-division tax. Don Waddell's there, not the youngest dude. I always think it's absolutely asinine. Mm-hmm. If you, we can't get killed by this, then don't trade him. Keep him if you think he's good. Yeah. But that is very old school thinking. You don't make in-division. The Flyers and Devils have made 2 trades ever. It's very much a thing, especially in hockey. But I wonder if that's the case.
Could be.
Also, there's this. I wanted to make the trade. I don't know if David Jiricek's good or not. He went 6th overall. You really liked him in that draft.
I did. Yeah. I wouldn't say I loved him, but I liked him. I liked him more than Gauthier.
My issue has been, and I would have been elated if they made this trade because trades are great for everyone.
Great for our views.
Columbus has been trying to replicate what Tortorella did for them since they got rid of John Tortorella. They have been doing this weird thing with Jiricek where you haven't really earned the ice time. You got to play in the AHL. You got to be scratched. You're not really our guy. He didn't like that. That's why he's leaving. They're trying to replicate what our coach does. Now, we have John Tortorella, the actual guy who has had success doing this, and Brad Shaw, the defensive wizard, who can take bad players and make them good, and good players and make them great. So maybe that would have been the X factor that makes it all work out.
Maybe.
But I wonder if there's, I don't want to say character issues, because I think of like character issues as like off-ice stuff.
Yeah.
But just like...
Or that he just doesn't listen to coaching.
Attitude issues.
Thinks he's so great and won't listen to
like
anyone.
He's LaFlemme from Goon.
From Goon.
Like he just thinks he's the man. Like, I don't know. I wonder if that's part of it. And it's like, well, if it didn't work and you're trying to replicate what Tortorella does, we have that guy. If this is just another Morgan Frost situation, then I don't see what the point is.
I mean, it's possible.
That's just
here's my thing.
I wanted him.
If they had concerns about his character, I don't think they would have checked in the first place. So I do think there was interest. I don't think there was anything that they saw as a dramatic red flag. Now, is it a little bit of a red flag that the team that drafted him is willing to trade him 2 years later? Sure, that's a little bit of a red flag, and maybe that prevented the Flyers from offering up the type of guys that Columbus would have required for them to get into the realistic bidding. Where I'm at with this is it's a bummer because I like Jiricek, and I do think that from a fit standpoint, he made sense for the Flyers. This is something where we're just going to have to see how it plays out, because if the Flyers prove right and Jiricek is just, a guy that maybe was worth a package of, worthy of a guy who's going to be a solid second pair defenseman, then it's not the end of the world, especially if guys like Andre and Drysdale become quality second pair defenseman. With Andre, it's like if he just stays a quality second pair defenseman, because that's what he's been. The disappointment on my part, it's less about Jiricek specifically, and it's more about this was an opportunity. This was an opportunity to get a guy with potential high-end upside, and when it came down to it, the Flyers decided they weren't willing to pay up. Now, maybe they're right. Maybe the guys that Columbus would have required for them to get involved are guys that will ultimately be better than David Jiricek in terms of overall value, or maybe they're not going to be better than Jiricek, but if you say Jiricek, that guy plus the first, plus the second, then suddenly it's way too much. Maybe. But it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity, and now it's an opportunity missed. And at some point in this,
they're going to have to pull a trigger
in the next
eventually.
year, in the next 2 years, they're going to have to pull the trigger on a couple of these kinds of trades. And this is one that they didn't. And maybe they couldn't. Maybe it would have been foolish for them to do it. But at some point, they're going to have to, and they didn't this time. And I think it's fair to be bummed that they didn't this time.
Absolutely. If they're not going to draft high, at least purposefully and consistently for several years, we keep asking the question, how do they get those guys then? Because that's typically where the star players are. And what are the Flyers missing? Star players.
Indeed.
Here was your opportunity to go get one of them. You did.
Yeah, to get a guy who maybe could be.
Yeah.
Again, maybe he's not, but you're going to have to take a swing on one or two of these types of guys, and now one of these types of guys is no longer available. That's a bummer.
Now maybe Minnesota wants to turn around and go, oh, you know what? Rossi's ELC expires after this year. Jiricek has another year left. We want to make way for a Kaprizov extension that helps us. Maybe they trade for Rossi tonight. Who the hell knows?
I mean, that'd be cool.
We all silly like the mayor.